So here we go, chapter 23. Still building on that, in order to fully be able to tap into the hidden love that we have for God, we have to recognize God within the universe, you kind of say. Because when we have this sort of understanding, because the other version, the long, short way of this deep contemplation meditation, basically creating this type of love and fear of God that's going to be way more enduring kind of thing. Here, because we don't necessarily have the intellectual wherewithal to accomplish this, or we haven't accomplished it just yet, instead what we're going to do is tap into what we already have and try to kindle that, stoke the flame of that. We have to understand what it means when we do what we're supposed to do. What does that look like? And if we don't do what we're supposed to do, what does that look like? So if we could understand the consequences, the repercussions of the things that we do, we'll have now the framework to make the right decision. If you put your hand on a stove, it's going to be hot, you get burned or blistered. So we understand, let's not put the hand on the stove. So what happens if someone, God forbid, transgresses, or what happens when someone does what they're supposed to do and they do a mitzvah? Well, before we can even understand that, we have to understand God within the universe. We say God created the world, so now there's world and God. No. World is still God. There is only God. While it doesn't look like it, because of the process of creation, because of the world that God wanted to create, the world that we see doesn't look like God. Not because it isn't, but because we can't see it. And that goes to the mashal of the turtle in the shell. Where'd the turtle go? Nowhere. It's in the shell. The shell is the turtle. We say we want to see God's face. We can't necessarily handle it, but that's what we want to see. Because, now we'll know that God's here. Chapter 22, we kind of got into this idea of what happens if someone does what they're not supposed to do. So even unwittingly or unintentionally, what they're saying is that the world is not only God. God created the world and God exists within the world, but it's not only him, because there is also a world. And the impetus for that, the starting point of that, is usually arrogance, because arrogance is an I amness. And saying I am means that, so what I say is important too. It goes. There's nothing that overrides my own wills or wants or desires. That's how a person could say, I hear what you're saying, God, but here's my opinion now on this sort of thing. 23, though, thank God, has a much more positive approach, because we're going to talk about Torah mitzvahs. We're going to pack in all the positive stuff, because 24 and 25 gets a little rough. 23, we start off with a couple of things. The Zohar tells us that God and His Torah are entirely one. We've seen this already, chapter 4. Same way, are you or are you your intellect? Well, it's the same thing. So God and His Torah are one, they're united and they're whole and they're one. Now, the other thing that it tells us is that it talks about the Ramach B'Kudin in Ramach Avin Debalka. The 248 commandments are the 248 organs of the king. What does that mean when we talk about the organs of the king? So, the same way that the organs work through an involuntary process. If I want my arm to move, my arm moves. I don't have to look at my arm and say, move! Go up! Go down. If I have a will within me to walk, to sit, I don't need to go through a whole intellectual process to make that occur. The organs are just the vehicle, the manifestation for whatever the inner desire is. Every organ in the human body is a garment for a particular faculty of the soul, as in the eye for sight, the ear for hearing, etc. Just as every commandment is a channel and garment for the divine will. What are we talking about here? We sort of introduced this in the last chapter. There's a difference between the external will and the inner will. The internal will, I guess. The external will is the by the way. The external will is the byproduct. So why is there evil in the world? Because God wants to reward us. So the evil is the external will, the sitra achra, negative forces, that's the external will. But the inner will is that I really want to reward you. So that there should be choice, etc., etc. There has to also be a challenge. There also has to be a decision making so that you can be rewarded for having made the right decision. To bring about a reward that's truly earned, I have to create a challenge to you to earning that reward. Yes, I have these other things that exist as well, but that's external to what I really want. For example, let's say you have a guy who's running to a business meeting. Oh, I gotta catch a plane. If you have a big business meeting, be very successful. And you can say, oh, he's running to the plane because catching flights is really, really important to him. That's just the guy who runs all day to catch flights. Maybe, but probably not. That's not what he really wants. What he really wants is not even the job, it's not even whatever. What he really wants is what he's gonna get. If I have a good deal, I'm gonna get a raise and get more money. And what am I gonna use that money for? Food, shelter, provide for my loved ones, etc. So what does he really want? What he really wants is providing food, shelter, etc. That's the inner will. The external will is everything else leading up to that. In order to get what I really, really want, I have to do a lot of other things first. Why does God desire that the world should exist? What is God's true inner will? He desires that mitzvahs should be performed. God's true will was that there should be creations that fulfill Torah mitzvahs. Everything that we see in the world today is all an external part of what God's true inner will is for Torah mitzvahs to be performed. Every single thing in the world is part of the external will. The true inner will, what God truly, truly wants, The entire reason that God created the world is Torah mitzvahs to be performed. We're going to get much more into this in some of the later chapters, but you could take it all the way to the extreme. Everything else is a byproduct. Even the higher worlds, even the angels, even the sun, the moon, the stars, everything. Everything is part of the external part of the will. All of it is a by the way, because what God truly wants are Torah mitzvahs. So the fact that he created such an intricate, detailed world, God didn't necessarily have to create that. And yet God chose to create such a textured world and such a specific kind of world. Usually when we're not being dopes about it, a beautiful world. And he did that all because he said this will benefit and this will encourage and help and be the best way for Torah mitzvahs to be fulfilled in this kind of world. God could have created us on the red planet. God could have created a world like that. Who said I need this tree to do Torah mitzvahs? Well, God said that tree that you're looking at right now, that is necessary in the world right now for Torah mitzvahs to occur. The side note of that, going back to the whole thing with Klipas Noga, the gray zone, is this holy or not, depending on how you use it? Well, that's the point. God said that anything that's in this world that's not absolutely forbidden to you can be used for Torah mitzvahs. I'm allowing it to exist in this world for Torah mitzvahs. I'm actually not sure what specific commentary it is, but why was gold created? Gold was created for the Mishkan. Now that we have it already, we use it for other things. But why was gold created? Gold was created for the Beis HaMikdash to have gold in it, to make a menorah, the Aron. That's why we have gold. So that is the entire world. What is the point of all this? What are we doing here? God wants Torah mitzvahs to be fulfilled. Which also, if you really want to take it to the deep end, you have to really think to yourself, most of my day, most of the things I'm running after, which will am I fulfilling with that? Is that really getting me closer to the entire existence of creation? Or am I just getting sidetracked? Because it also says, even all the upper worlds, they all get their life and their life force, the sustenance they all get from the mitzvahs that we do down here in this world. Because again, the entire reason for existence, the entire reason for creation is Torah mitzvahs. We haven't emphasized that enough yet. Now, going back to the whole thing with the organs, going back to that for a second. When we do a mitzvah, whatever the mitzvah is going to be, we give tzedakah, we walk to shul, we walk to visit a friend who's sick or whatever, we use our mouths to study Torah for prayer, that part of our body becomes a chariot then for the divine will. Because mitzvahs are what God wants. So when I do what God wants, my organ, my limb, whatever is doing that with, actually becomes now an extension of the fulfillment of the divine will. The same way that your organs have this involuntary reaction because the soul is controlling all of it, your life force is controlling all of it, you achieve that in that moment of doing a mitzvah. And it's the divine light, the divine life force that's kind of channeling that. Because everything in the physical world has a spiritual counterpart to it, that for the body, for example, or something like that, that there is some sort of miscommunication or blockage that's occurring with something in the physical body is not entirely right. Which is why you want to double down and up to our mitzvahs. We still go to the doctor and we still do all that stuff that we're supposed to be doing. That's only because you need a vessel within the natural world to make things occur. But spiritually, there's something that's getting lost in translation. You have a life force that's trying to give to you, but there's something that's blocking you, which is why the truth is Tehillim, the mitzvah that you do in someone's honor or anything like that. We need to do physical actions for it. Anyway, so the point is that when you use any of these things for mitzvahs, you're becoming like an extension. This organ, this limb in this moment is becoming a chariot for the divine will. In general, the body is a garment for the soul. The soul can't do anything by itself. It needs a body. It needs a body to do stuff for it. So when the body is going to do what the soul wants, it's becoming an extension of what's supposed to be. But it doesn't do what it wants, and that's why we got to get things back into line. So during that time, it becomes a chariot for the divine will in that moment. Which, after a person passes on, the body, even though the soul is eternal, the body is not specifically eternal, but the body has to still be respected, because this was a vehicle for Torah mitzvahs. And then also, when Mashiach comes, and we have Tchias HaMesim, the body comes back. Because we can't totally disregard the role that the body played in fulfilling the divine. It changes the body. Obviously, in a spiritual sense, it changes the body to have been this vehicle for godliness. It's not the same anymore. It just doesn't become nothingness. Anyways, this is when one of our organs, where we use the hand to do what it's supposed to do, etc. It literally becomes a chariot for the divine will. You are channeling that divine energy the same way that the soul doesn't have to tell the arm move. It's just a flow and it's just connected to it like that. When we do a mitzvah with our hand, with whatever, it's just there's this flow that's occurring. That's why we also have that ha'avas hein markava. The avos, all of the entirety of their being. It wasn't just an arm or a leg in a certain moment. The entirety of their being was totally given over to divine will. For us, my hand right now, in the moment of giving tzedakah, becomes a divine chariot. After that moment of tzedakah is over, who knows what my hand's going to do? The hand is not in continual process of giving tzedakah. So it's not a continual process of being part of the chariot. So I've achieved chariotness. I've achieved the level of chariot in that moment, but it's a moment that passes for the average person, for a regular person. This is just, again, to underline and highlight, understand now that the level that the Avos were on is that the entirety of their being was a chariot at all times. The Avos are the only ones, they reach this level. It's part of how it became part of our inheritance. Because it became so much a part of them, it became part of the DNA of them. They then passed on to all the generations. So they were always an extension of God's will at all times. So now we look at the second part of this. It now tells us that there's different levels of unity that happen when doing Torah and with mitzvahs. So with mitzvahs, we can have the level of the chariot and the driver. The body becomes like a level of a chariot, and the driver is like the divine will that channels it. Or when we're talking about the divine soul's level of action, it's an even higher level that achieves, it becomes like body and soul. Because chariot and driver are two separate things. There's a chariot and there's a driver. They're two separate entities, and then the driver just steers the chariot. The body and soul unite to become a unified entity. However, at the end of the day, they're still kind of separate things. There's a body and there's a soul. They come together, and now we have this great unity that occurs. These are two different levels that can be reached when we fulfill mitzvahs. Torah study, and this is one of the examples where it's like, what's more important, Torah study or mitzvahs? Well, again, it depends the angle that we're going at. Mitzvahs in this regard, mitzvahs are Hashem's will, and it's his desire. When we do what God wants, we have now fulfilled the will. Torah, however, this is God's wisdom and God's essence. This is a step above that. This is a step that goes beyond that. The unity that occurs through Torah, it's called a perfect unity with God himself. We become wholly united with God. Not just that, but it creates a greater awe of God. The example that they give is the difference between building the palace and the blueprint. So if you have a king who decides, oh, I would love to have a new palace. Okay, we will build you a palace. Tell us what you want. So you have to go and you have to design the blueprint. When the palace is built, the palace is the king's will. It's his desire. Oh, wow, I like what you've done here. Beautiful. And there's a random waterfall in the middle of nowhere because he's a king and he could do that. But you've only seen the manifestation of what the king wanted when you're walking through the palace. But if you want to really understand, then you have to look at the blueprints. The blueprints are going to explain more. You're going to see, oh, I see. You see it much more on the level of the blueprint than you see it on the level of the actual creation. Torah mitzvahs is the fulfillment of the will. This is what I want, and here's the manifestation of the want. Torah, however, that's the blueprint. First of all, we know Torah is the blueprint of creation. If you really want to know what's going on in the world, you can look at Torah. Torah has the answers for everything. It is the blueprint of creation. At the blueprint of creation, God's wisdom and essence, we are actually uniting with God. It becomes a perfect unity of not just a chariot and a driver and a body and soul. They're two separate entities that somehow come together. They fuse together to create something that's even better than that, but still two separate entities. Torah study, we're not two separate entities anymore. It's a perfect unity. Where it's literally like when you're speaking, it's like God speaking. It's like God's words of Torah. That's why Torah study is considered a much higher level. And then how does it create a greater awe of God? Because when you think about the light and the essence of God that is revealed within the Torah, it's a light that cannot even be manifest in the higher world. When we talk about what we call Sovev Kol Almin, we did this in chapter 3. There's Sovev Kol Almin, there's Mamalik Kol Almin. Mamalik Kol Almin means that he fills all the world. This is kind of like the personal life force that we each have. Personalized divine light. That every creature in creation has it because it's tailored to you. Whatever this creation is, Mamalik Kol Almin, it kind of fits you. Sovev Kol Almin is a light that's so much. It's so bright, it's so high that it can't be individually tailored. It can't be compacted in that kind of way. It can't be channeled in that kind of way because it's just so much muchness. Not only that, but this light that's so great, it cannot even be fully manifest even in the higher worlds. We can't handle it. However, this light is actually revealed within Torah. Why? Because Torah is God's wisdom. It's God's will. The fact that we have a Torah scroll is only because God had to give us a packaging to study it. But in that moment of connection, we are actually tapping into this divine light that cannot even manifest in the worlds because it's just so bright. It's so great. That's how it's supposed to fill us with awe when we think about what I'm saying right now. This light that I'm relaying, this divine energy that I'm tapping into, that I'm giving over right now, that I'm thinking in my thoughts and speaking right now. Because it's specifically for thought and speech, Torah study. Action is more for mitzvahs. That's more of the physical thing. But thought and speech, this light, this divine energy that I'm tapping into right now, is not even a light that can be fully revealed up in the higher realms. That's something. That's how it's supposed to fill us with a greater awe. That's why we have here, the term perfect unity indicates that the two become one and the same. Unlike, for example, the unity of body and soul, which retain their separate identities even when they join to form one unit. The same way the divine soul and its faculties of speech and thought are united with the divine will when one thinks or speaks matters of Torah. Since there is no such concealment when one studies the Torah, one attains thereby a perfect unity with God. That is, now to explain, when we're talking about the encouragement that we have to try to tap in for Torah mitzvahs, this is the actual result of them. This is what actually occurs. The body, the physical body, can become a chariot for the divine will, and the level of Maisa in the Nefesh Elokis becomes like a body and soul. This channeling that we have, your entire being, your organ, your limb, in that moment was entirely transformed into a chariot for God's will. And when we study Torah, it's not just God's will that we're talking about, we're tapping into God's actual essence, tapping into an actual light that cannot even be manifest and fully revealed in the higher worlds. We're worried about not being able to see the turtle. You want to know where the turtle is? The turtle's in Torah. When you study Torah, you see the full turtle. A full revelation of godliness occurs in the study of the Torah. When you say, where is it? I want to see him. I don't want it to be concealed. What are these contractions that you talk about in cause and effect and symptom and he contracted. I want to see God. Oh, you want to see God? Right here. Torah will reveal God and reveals God on a level. It's an absolute revelation. There is no concealment of God. You're talking about God's infinity and you're trying to grasp it. We do grasp it. We learned already in chapter 5. We're hugging the king. Hugs for everybody. All Torah study. Yeah, commentaries, anything that's an exploration of what Torah is. Now, the one thing this chapter ends off on, the bottom line that it gives us, and by the way, if you can't create this great awe within yourself when you're studying Torah, that you can use this great awe now for Torah study, and because you're like, wow, the Sod Kolam, and then I'm tapping into this light, don't worry about it. Still do what you've got to do. That's what the chapter tells us as the punchline. Don't be dissuaded from Torah mitzvahs just because you can't tap into this high level of awe. It might be your soul might not be able to handle it. You just keep doing what you got to do. Don't let it hold you back. That's the end of chapter 23.